Hello and welcome. The goal of this podcast is to get listeners connected with others in the sports industry because they say it's all about who you know, and now you know us. All right, ladies and gentlemen, here we go. We are happy to have 𝗪𝗵𝘁 on the Constant Sports Podcast today, and thanks for joining us today, Gary.
Yeah, it's such an honor to be here.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it. And for those who may not be familiar with Gary, he is one of the top mental performance coaches in the world, helping elite athletes, teams, businesses really unlock their full potential. As the creator of Elite Mindset Mental Training System and Game Plan for Life, Gary has worked with top organizations like the Mariners, the Texans, USA Figure Skating, and more. And so, really, in this episode, a little bit different episode than we've done in the past, but we're going to wrap it up into the peak performance, mental toughness, leadership in high stakes environments, and how we can become better and reach our full potential. So, Gary, I know that was a mouthful there to kind of jump in, but I was curious as we start here, kind of what your passion is and how you got into this high performance space.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've never really thought much about being a leader, and growing up, I was always placed in leadership positions, even though I didn't even know what that meant. Like I don't even know. But I found myself in lots of leadership positions growing up. Then, as time evolved, I ended up being in more and more leadership kind of stuff, and so I often thought, well, what's my like? How do I relate to people, and how can I bring the best out of people? And I found out that coaching was really the best thing that I could do. And a lot of people will maybe excel on the platform, or they will maybe be sort of that A type, really strong leader and tell everyone what to do. That really hasn't been the case for me. It's just been like trying to figure out, like, okay, I'm working with someone, or I am coaching, mentoring, trying to be some type of example. How do I bring the best out of them? And I was cerebral enough, I think, even at an early age, to kind of go, okay, so there's a lot of ways to approach this situation. I could just tell them the answer, or I could help them discover the answer. And lo and behold, studies show even today that when you help someone discover an answer, it's actually rather remarkable. Not only does it penetrate their thinking and their life more, it actually gets them there quicker.
Mm.
And you would think, well, if I just treat my clients like children, I just tell them what to do in the moment because I need to demand compliance right away. Don't touch the stove. When in reality, they'll probably figure it out on their own much quicker than if we told them the answer. And so I've always kind of been really intrigued with how to transfer information, or even not even that, but just ask the right questions at the right time so that it benefits the client to the maximum, effect. So that's kind of been my modus operandi, kind of what I feel like my calling or my goal is just to unlock people. And I want the fruit of my life to grow on other people's trees. So when I help them succeed, I feel like I've just fulfilled my purpose. And so I've given my life over just to trying to bring the best out of people.
Yeah, love it. And that's kind of one of the reasons I came across some of your stuff online, and it kind of resonated with me. And I think leadership it's such a like a funny kind of concept and construct, right? When people think of leadership, they think of like, the big alpha and being the loudest and hooting and hollering. And that's not, I mean, at some cases, I suppose that's needed. But I feel like a majority of the time that's not necessarily, what is needed, right? There's multiple roles in leadership and how it plays and how it can affect each of us. And looking forward to diving into that a little bit. And on some of the stuff I was reading on your website and on your socials and whatnot, it's kind of what separates the elite performers kind of from the rest, right? The elite business men and women from the rest. And so maybe you can give us some insight on that.
Yeah, well, it's kind of interesting. My wife and I were chatting the other day about, like, well, she was asking me, like, how do I know which body of knowledge to pull from when I'm helping somebody? And sometimes it's just like the current one. Like like I have this, body of knowledge that I have academically, and I have, 30 years of leadership experience. But sometimes the things that I'm learning right in the moment are some of the most powerful. And one of the things that I'm learning right now is learning how to draw the best out of people by helping them prioritize what's important.
Right.
So, like, for example, I call them the difference between boulders and pebbles. Like, the boulders are really hold the most weight, they're the biggest, they take up the most mass. And the pebbles are just sort of like, they're all important, everything's important. However, right now, what I need to be doing in my life is the most important thing, and it might be the thing that I'm resisting. It might
Mhm.
be the thing that I just haven't made enough time for or made enough of a priority. So a lot of what I do is help people do the right thing at the right time, and helping prioritize those things are really important. And I think that's what sets the elite apart, is they know what to do when. And is it at the expense of all sorts of other things that are really important? Absolutely it is. But if you want to sort of live that life that is always constantly thinking like, how do I do this the best way or the most efficient way, then you literally could say to yourself, well, what's the best thing for me to be doing right now in this moment? And I think to live your life in such a way is to prioritize, or at least have the discernment to prioritize the urgent over the important, or the most critical over all the other important things. Like that's really important.
Mhm.
And I think in life we kind of miss that oftentimes because, like for example, I haven't been very productive lately. And I love to be productive. I
Yeah.
love to be efficient. But when you have family issues, and family challenges, and they're not necessarily mine, but you've got things going on in your family, you put certain things down so
Right.
that you can address the most important things. And when my kids get older, or when my family members get older, what are they going to remember? That Gary was this, he powered through everything. He was going to work hard and he did all these things. Or did he set aside those things for us? And
Mhm.
did he view us as important enough to lay that aside? And so, does my business or does my life, sort of, um, do I have to put some of those things aside for a season? Yeah, sometimes you do, for the most important thing.
Yeah, well said there, and it just kind of got me thinking about some of the productivity stuff. And I feel like in nowadays, people are just trying to do as much stuff, or write things off their checklist, even if they're not the boulders or the pebbles. They're just like, okay, make me feel busy, right? And they're not really getting anything done. And I like a lot of the things that I was reading about, kind of on the neuroscience of the brain and optimizing, and kind of how you can maybe not trick your brain into kind of optimizing or putting the best things forward. But how have you seen kind of the role of neuroscience in the brain kind of, I don't want to use the word trick, but hopefully you get what I'm saying, right? To get the most productive and optimize, I guess, your situation.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty fascinating, actually. So when we're in crisis, our brain goes into a different mode,
Mhm.
right? The neuroscience will even teach that, right? Like if we're in crisis, that's one thing. If we're in coping, sort of in the coping realm, then that's another thing. If we're in the mental performance and optimization, that's another thing. So knowing what phase of life, or maybe there's a particular area in our life that is in crisis, it actually has a dramatic effect on all the other areas of our life. And so to address the crises, I think is number one, is just like the most crucial thing that we can do. Move out of crisis, because when we have that overflow neurochemically with cortisol, it's actually a neural inhibitor,
Mhm.
right? So it reduces the amount of choices that we have. It's either fight or flight. When in reality, if we have multi-layered thinking, we can sort of either dig deeper and give ourselves more options, or we can think through more things and maybe even come up with a hybrid solution to something. But when you're in fight or flight in an area of your life, then you just don't see it or feel like you have a lot of options.
Mhm.
And at that point you can either fight or flight, or you can shut down. And
Okay.
so moving out of crisis, even from a neurochemical viewpoint, is actually really helpful and really important. So, the way that we live our life and addressing the right thing at the right time, if there's a crisis going on, addressing that thing and giving it the time and energy and resources to be able to address it's really important. And, we can give ourselves then move to coping, and we can give ourselves coping mechanisms to be able to handle those things after we address them. And once we do that long enough, and we feel like we have it under control, and then we can move into the thriving areas of our life. But it's amazing how all the different areas of our life are connected. Like I call them domains. I,
Mhm.
I suggest there's at least 9 different domains of our life. And when we're in crisis in one of them, then it's hard. And so, yeah, I think prioritizing those things, even from a neurochemical point of view, has benefits for our overall performance. One of the things I like to talk about is the Seattle Seahawks,
Mhm.
and how they will have this program where they are sort of tapping into the sort of like the calling of each of the players. So if let's say Cliff Averill wants to help build wells in Africa, then, then just in terms of his own sense of like meaning and calling and purpose, he's giving his life to the things that are most important. So that's that prioritizing again. And that giving his life away is so important. And when he's really dialed into that, he's not at the bars, he's not getting in trouble, he's not doing these other things. And so helping people find their identity and help people find their purpose and calling, even at the professional athlete level, is really important.
Yeah, well, and I think kind of developing those elite mental habits and what we talked about, kind of your nine domains there. But how can, I guess, maybe not specifically elite athletes, but someone trying to potentially be an elite athlete or an elite businessman or woman, how can they kind of develop those mental habits, maybe day-to-day things, and kind of to build those blocks?
Yeah. Well, every mental performance coach has a different starting point, and mine in particular is I teach something called identity-based mental performance. So it's primarily who are you and what do you want and how much do you want it and how do you plan on getting there?
Mhm.
And answering those fundamental identity-based questions are really important. So, for example, let's say someone wants to really be a great business person and they sort of are consuming all the latest stuff on the internet about optimization and how to, goal setting and, be a badass and all this kind of stuff. Well, if I superimpose what makes one person successful to another person, it's not really who they are. So science might say, you know, um, you know, uh, getting up early is the best thing that you can possibly do. And, there might be some truth for that. But I know night owls that are incredibly productive.
Yeah.
And if say, hey, get up, like I get up at 3:45 every morning. But if I tell someone that's a night owl to get up, at 3, 4, they're just a zombie for the next 4 or 5 hours. So, you can try and adapt and you can try, but what if we just sort of accepted who we were
Right.
and we maximized who we were just in the way that we're naturally wired in terms of our identity.
Mhm.
And what if we just said, well, what would someone with our kind of identity and skills, habits, and talents, how can we just take what you already have and maximize them? Because that way you're going to have a longevity and a consistency that is required for you to be successful at something. But if I am superimpose what works for somebody else onto somebody else, and they really struggle with that habit or that rhythm, they're not going to do it long enough to be successful. And
Mhm.
so the sense of like, finding out who you are and what you want, like learn as much as you can about yourself. And the way I like to teach people to do this is like take every personality survey you can possibly imagine. Like just take them all. Don't even think twice about them. Go learn about yourself as much as possible and then fashion your life around what you're naturally good at. And you might say, well, shouldn't I learn about what I'm bad at? Well, yeah, that can be helpful. But if you think about a professional athlete, they're good at what they do because of how they're wired. You look at Bobby Wagner, who played for the Seahawks forever, one of the top, all-time greatest linebackers ever. If you put him at DB or at corner, he's not going to thrive, right?
Yeah.
You say, well, he should work on his weaknesses. Well, maybe he should just tap into his strengths, because if he doesn't tap into his strengths, he's not playing pro football. But if he taps into his strengths, then he has a shot at it. And so I just think like knowing who you are and take as many personality exams as you can and
Mhm.
accept and surrender to the way that you've been wired, and then just try to maximize those.
Right. And then is that regarding the personality tests and things, is I know on your website you kind of have an assessment, what is it, mental conditioning, kind of
Yeah,
the
yeah, mental
assessment. So is
performance
that
assessment.
similar to like a personality test, or the
Yeah,
mental
it's
side of
not
it?
so much a personality test as it is sort of giving you an indication that if you were to work on an aspect of mental performance, what areas are your greatest gain?
Okay.
So, like for example, like with my assessment, I identified 22. Maybe I think, and there's another one that I missed, but I think there's 22 or 23 different categories in
Mhm.
mental performance. And so, as people think about like assessing their own mental performance, where would you start? Like, how would you even know where to start if you
Yeah,
didn't
where to
know the
begin.
categories and you didn't have a way of measuring how well you were doing at those things? And so, what the mental performance assessment does is it identifies your top three greatest growth areas. And you might find that just working on one or two of those areas might unlock performance that you never knew that you had.
Yeah.
And in the same way, if let's say you have a pretty solid mindset, then I like to think in terms of gap. If you scored 73% in, let's say, self-talk, well, 73% is pretty darn good, but on the other hand, you have 27%, increase
Mhm.
possible. Like if you were to increase 27% in this area,
Yeah.
what are you capable of? Or 30%? Or what if you aggregated every area and that you had, let's say you gained 2 or 3 or 5% in all 22 categories? That means that you have like, a 30, 40, 50, 60% potential gain in your mental performance. And I think the mental performance piece, it literally it is literally the differentiator between someone, succeeding and not succeeding.
Mhm. Yeah, no, very cool. And that's one of the cool things I think about. It's like the 1% get 1% better concept each day, and that accumulating over time is obviously big, I guess, increase. But in the moment, it just feels like I'm not really going anywhere. But at the end of the day, you are. And kind of, I want to touch on a little bit about where you see kind of the mental training, kind of some emerging trends for athletes and business professionals, kind of the future of mental performance.
Well, what a fascinating question. I'm not sure I've been asked that question before. I think it's really interesting. Like even right now, even this morning, to be honest, I was toying with some AI.
Okay.
And the AI is remarkable because what it basically you can build an app you know in about half an hour,
Yeah.
and it is scary good. And the reason why I say that is because I can prompt it, and in fact I was just playing with it this morning. I can prompt it and say, grab every video that I've ever done, transcribe it, or anything I've ever written, and anything that's online. You transcribe all those things and look for keywords in mental performance like self-talk. And then what it'll do is if I can create an app, or I can add it as part of my coaching repertoire, and you can have 24 access to Gary Chupik on any topic in mental performance, period. So anything I've ever said online ever will actually show up. And then when a player interacts with this, they'll actually get my answers.
Right.
And so I think the future is figuring out how to scale mental performance. But here's the problem is unless I teach the AI to address issues in the proper order, it still doesn't know how to sequence material. So for example, if you're going to bake a cake, you have all the right ingredients, but you haven't sequenced it properly. You're not getting the intended outcome as a cake. So the internet and AI doesn't know how to sequence it unless
Mm.
I tell them how to sequence it. But even then, it's very dynamic, right? Like what one player might need, even though I have a sequence, maybe they need to start at number two instead of number one,
Right.
and then I can move number one to number two and flip flop them. So it has its limitations, but I think the field of sports psych and mental performance, I think, is trying to scale, and I'm
Mhm.
just not sure how great that's going to be. And the other part that it doesn't account for is the emotional, the
Okay.
socio-emotional part of coaching, where if I get to interact with someone and I see that they're visually or verbally or emotively or in terms of even their tone. Like AI doesn't know how to read tone.
No, good
But
point. Yeah.
when it comes to communication, content, tone, and body language are
Oh,
the
yeah.
three
So that's there.
biggest, right? And so if you're not getting tone, you're missing the second biggest part of communication. So there's limitations to the AI piece and scaling, because everyone talks about scaling their business, right?
Mhm.
Like everyone does. But for my industry, that might be challenging. I think a lot of teams might want to check the mental performance box and say, well, yeah, we have access to all this content and
Mhm.
information, but you're not getting that one-on-one interaction.
Right. Well, I think sports especially is kind of, yeah, I don't know if it's a race, but it feels like it's a push towards kind of the data and the analytics, behind, whether it's speed, power, et cetera. And then I feel like they're trying to tap into it a little bit on the mental side of it. And it makes me think about when kind of will release the results, with like Patrick Mahomes and his heart rate when he's on the field versus when he's off the field. And, it skyrockets when he's off the field in big situations. But then when he's on the field, it's like fourth and goal, 10 seconds left, need a touchdown. It's like basically just flatlined. And I thought that's very interesting, kind of to get behind someone's emotional state and kind of somewhat have the data and analytics behind that. I was curious what your thoughts are on kind of those types of situations where you have these elite athletes in these super high tense situations and they're calm.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very fascinating field. Even even when you're calm, you make mistakes, right? Like,
Yeah.
but you do tend to think a little better when you're calm.
Mm.
However, if you're too calm, and my example would be, and you just mentioned it, the Kansas City Chiefs looked like they were sleeping
Yeah,
in the
good point.
last Super Bowl, right? Like they were not actively and emotively engaged enough in the game. It's almost like they had been there before. They knew what to expect. They
Yeah.
were calm. They were just going to do their thing, and it didn't work. Now you can say Philadelphia was more talented, but just 5 minutes of observation about that game, watching it, you could just kind of go, "Oh, Philadelphia is way more
Yeah,
emotionally
they're into
engaged
it.
in
Yeah.
this game, right?" So it's not the data and the all the sort of like the embedded technology that we have these days it doesn't tell the full story yet.
Yeah.
And I think the emotional part, like I was working with one athlete and we were talking about, just his life and some of the challenges that he had. He's defensive end
Mhm.
for a college team. He's just a big dude. And we were just talking about life. And then finally I said, you know what? I said, because he was a multi-sport player, and I said, you never hit a home run, did you? And he just began to weep and he just cried because no one had ever like tore the onion peel back
Back. Yeah.
in that part of his life. He was a 6 foot some 6'3" or whatever he was. He's
Mhm.
always the biggest kid on the field. He played first base. He was a good athlete, like really, but he never hit a home run. Other smaller guys on his team hit home runs, but he
Right.
never did.
Wow.
And so just the freedom that he had after that moment, after just kind of weeping and just kind of go, yeah, no, I just never told anyone. Yeah, he goes, and I have to live with that every day. I carry that burden. And he said he's never told anyone that before. And so I think that the data is always important, but man, there's other things that you can tap in. You can tap into emotional,
Mhm.
you can tap into existential, you can tap into spiritual for performance. You can tap into all these different things for performance. But if we just leave it to data and analytics and even sports psychology, we're actually doing a disservice to that athlete because there's hidden treasures of performance in every single person. And our job as mental performance coaches and sports psychologists is to go uncover that.
Right. And that's kind of the heels of the question I was uh, you touched on it perfectly, but was can you have all this data and then how do you extrapolate? How do you get the answers from the data? Because it might not correlate. So you kind of nailed that before I even asked it. So that's how you know we got a true professional on our hands. I appreciate that. And then kind of some rapid fire questions that some of the viewers kind of messaged in when I said we were going to be interviewing, and one of them is what's one daily habit that they can implement to improve their mental performance?
Oh, what a great question. Um, I would, well, my favorite and one that I use the most often, and that is hitting the red reset button. And so what that is imagine a computer that has all these tabs open. And so what's happening is when you're opening up a new tab, but your computer hard drive, the motherboard starts to slow down, right?
Mhm.
So you have all these components that start to slow down because you have too many tabs open. Well, what if you could reset your computer after every conversation? What if you could reset after every play? What if you could reset after, talking with a potential client and, or even after a disappointing email? What if you could hit reset? And so hitting that reset button and then going into neutral thinking is the most powerful combination of two things that I can ever teach somebody. It's hitting the red reset button and going into neutral thinking. And here's why, is because when you go into neutral thinking, you are no longer self-focused and you are no longer others focused, but you are task focused. And so when you can recruit all the different faculties in your mind, your body, your soul, your spirit, and you tap into all of those things and you can fully hit that reset button and then go into neutral thinking to be only task focused. Because the task is what you really want to be able to get done. It's the task doing that makes you successful on the day-to-day execution piece. There are other things that make you successful, but on a day-to-day execution, it's your ability to hit that red reset button and go into neutral thinking and be very, very task focused without all the emotional baggage from a previous conversation or email or event that happened. You're just wiping the slate clean, and then you just hit the red reset button. So that's the greatest rhythm or habit that I could teach anybody at any point in time.
Great. Yeah, looking forward to it. And I'm looking forward to implementing that myself. And then regarding, books, articles, the websites yourself, obviously, what are some key, I guess, industry type of related content that the athletes or, elite people trying to be elite can tap into?
Yeah, this is always an interesting question because there are multiple books out there that are really good. There are some that are just sort of regurgitate a lot of boring stuff that you can find anywhere. You can ask ChatGPT,
Yeah.
but there's a book that really changed a lot of my life, and that was The Inner Game of Tennis by Tim Galloway, and it was one of the very first books ever written on sports psych. And I remember I was doing a lot of public speaking at the time, but I'm always nervous, right? In fact, I'm speaking to 700 people this upcoming Friday,
Okay.
and so I kind of have to be on, right? But The Inner Game of Tennis was a book that Pete Carroll gave one of his players as a defensive end who was really struggling with his performance, and he gave it to him during a bye week, so in the middle of the season, and the player's stats before he read the book and after he read the book were totally different. They
Wow.
were way better. And so I was like, well, what in the world is this book?
Yeah. What's going on?
The inner game. Why would Pete Carroll tell a defensive end to go read The Inner Game of Tennis? And it was about sort of just like being calm in the midst of being, a stressful situation.
Mhm.
And just your body will naturally know what to do and how to react. But your job is to sort of calm your nerves down and then just play instinctually. And I think that is just a really fun book to be able to transpose whatever our craft is, whether you're in business or you're an athlete or a mom or whatever, whoever you are, is just take that inner game of tennis and then read it and then transpose it onto your whatever your craft is. And I think there would be a lot of benefit to it. So, of course, there's lots of podcasts and things out there that are good. But yeah, my inner game of tennis is one of my favorite.
All right, we'll put it on the bookshelf, the inner game of tennis. We're looking forward to getting that and diving into that. And then, Gary, before we wrap up here, I want you to at least shout out kind of the places where the listeners and followers can find you on the socials, website, etc.
Oh, you're very kind. Thank you. So a lot of my clients hang out on Instagram. So
Mhm.
that's where I am. So Elite Mindset on Instagram. I think there's a couple accounts, but I'm the one that has the blue verified dot. So Elite Mindset. And then my website is elitemindsetnation.com because I want to create a nation of high performers. And yeah, and people can also take the mental performance assessment from that website
Yep.
and it's incredibly inexpensive. These things range anywhere from $30 to $150 a piece, and I'm just sort of introduced it like for the very first time this past December. So I'm just getting it out there and putting it on the market. But I already have a couple of really big companies who want to use it for their benefit. So yeah, Instagram, Elite Mindset, and elitemindsetnation.com.
Exciting stuff. Yeah, we'll make sure to link all those in the descriptions and all that when we publish this. And we appreciate you stopping by today, Gary, on the Constant Sports Podcast. And before we go, any last words before we leave here?
Other than double down on you, like everyone thinks about their weaknesses and they think constantly. In fact, I think we obsess over our weaknesses. But I think if we can have a short memory when it comes to our weaknesses and just say, I am who I am, but focus on your strengths and then play to your strengths, you'll be like a great athlete. Great athletes play to their strengths. That's what makes them great. They don't play to their weaknesses. They can sort of bring up their weaknesses, but they always play to their strengths. And so my encouragement to you and your audience is play to your strengths.
Very well said and perfect last words to put a ball in the episode. And Gary, we appreciate you coming by today. And to the listeners and viewers, we'll Make sure to find us on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll see you guys next week.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Connor.
You bet.